The end is near for these dynasty fantasy football running backs. Last year, I tackled the age-old question, when are the best running backs in the NFL going to suddenly fall off a cliff? When are they going to become washed up? How many touches does it usually take for that to happen? How old are they usually when they fall off a cliff? I'm sure you guys clicked on my stupid mug on this video because you want to know when to sell these older dynasty running backs, these older fantasy football running backs before you're caught holding the bag. So without further ado, I'm not going to bury the lead whatsoever. Let's get right into it. All right, so if you guys recall, last year I put out a video called Sell These Running Backs Now Part 2, where I tackled the running back age and touch apex. This video will be basically a continuation of that video with some new data, some new running backs that fell off this past year. The reality of this position is however many years you think your veteran running back has left in the tank as a RB1 or a major running back producer, the real answer is probably a year or two less than what you initially anticipate. Last year, I conducted a study of multi-time running back ones when they fell off from a fantasy perspective. These were the best of the best, right? The average running back career is 2.67 years, but that doesn't account for the guys who are simply built different, the guys who have carried us to fantasy championships in the past. The criteria for this study was multi-time RB1s since the year 2000 who have eventually dropped off. Guys that got older, their biggest point per game fall off had to occur after their age 25 season. Typically, these guys would have been productive early on in their rookie contracts, whatever. Maybe they got extended, got a bit older, a lot of wear and tear on the legs, and they started to wear down and fall off. So all of this data is available on flockfantasy.com. If you guys want to check it out, of course, use code FSE for 30% off if you want access to it. And we are running a special promotion right now. Anybody who signs up annually will get a free Zoom consult to talk about whatever you want to talk about fantasy-wise for about a half an hour. There's like 12 columns in this table. So before I confuse anybody, I'm just going to go through each one quickly so nobody is lost. To begin, I documented their RB1 seasons, their ages during their RB1 season, and how many points per game they eventually lost in their drop-off season, because all of the guys in this database eventually fell off from a production standpoint. The average drop-off of these 46 multi-time RB1 since 2000 was 5.85 PPR points per game. To contextualize how much that ends up being over a full season, that's basically the difference between Austin Eckler this year, who is the RB1 in points per game with 21.9, and Joe Mixon, who is the RB7 this year in points per game with 16.0. So it's basically the difference between those two guys in the drop-off season. Next, you guys can see how I measured how old these guys were during their drop-off year, because I wanted to know, obviously, we're trying to answer the question, how old are these guys when they drop off? On average, they were 28.3 years old. And how many touches did they have under their belt? 1,632 career carries and receptions was the touch number on average as well. Then we get into how their ADP was affected as a result of this. Since Dynasty is mostly a new concept, we only have ADP data for 25 of these 46 running backs going back to 2012. Before their drop-off, these guys were going on average as a top 12 running back in Dynasty, with about half of them going inside the top 10. So we're not talking about guys that we, knew were washed up necessarily before the season start. They were still thought of as highly valuable on the market, probably a top 4-round pick-ish in startups. But after their drop-off, they fell to RB30 on average just 1 year later, just after that drop-off season, or a difference of 18 spots in running back ADP. And to contextualize that value difference, Austin Eckler right now is the RB12 in Dynasty. Dalvin Cook is the RB31 in Dynasty, two older running backs, but we're talking, 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds later in terms of startup ADP. So that's a big time swing. And especially if you don't get great production, which obviously you wouldn't be if they were falling off in that season, that is definitely a big time blow. And lastly, something new that I wanted to test that I didn't talk about in last year's video was that I wanted to break down redraft ADP. Because redraft is a good indicator of how the market feels about a player's 1 year outlook. And since we're talking about aging running backs in general, I think it's pretty obvious and self-explanatory that these guys lose dynasty ADP because they're older players and older running backs. But in redraft formats, if they're aging running backs with great outlooks, they should still probably be going high in drafts, right? Basically, I wanted to see if we could apply a similar concept with aging running backs that we apply to rookie wide receivers who poorly. That face planners concept also applies to running backs that we think are washed up, because redraft ADP is a good indicator of how we feel about these players. And since 2006, which is the most recent or the latest ADP data that I could find, the 40 running backs of this 46 that had ADP data, only 3 of them outperformed their ADP. LaDainian Tomlinson in 2009 outperformed his ADP from RB31 to RB20 was his final finish that year after his, washed up season. Frank Gore was RB24 in 2011 drafts and finished as RB14. And the only guy that isn't going to be in the Hall of Fame someday or isn't already in the Hall of Fame was Mark Ingram in 2019, who was the only running back to not lose any ADP the season following his drop-off as well. So he was going off the board as RB22 in 2018 drafts, had his fall-off season, and went off at the board as RB21 the next year. But as you'll recall, he was actually suspended in 2018, which is why he was going off the board as RB22, not necessarily because people thought he was going to fall off or something like that. He was suspended. He would have been a top 12 back without that suspension in 2018. So to summarize, basically, it took 2 Hall of Famers and Mark Ingram, who played for the best offense in the NFL that year in the Baltimore Ravens, for any of these washed up running backs to pay off after their fall off. And that's definitely crucial to understand once we talk about the current running backs, because a lot of them have already fallen off. Per this data, DeMarco Murray in 2015, David Johnson in 2019, and Melvin Gordon in 2020 were the only other 3 backs to finish about where they were drafted. So these guys didn't return on ADP, but they didn't kill you. But other than those 6 running backs, the 3 that I just outlined, and then the other 3, everybody else pretty much stunk it up. After they fell off, they were brutal. That is 34 out of 40 running backs, or an 85% hit rate of the market, basically saying at redraft ADP, when these guys fall off a cliff and redraft ADP after their washed up season, we are going to draft them as if they are washed up. And generally speaking, none of them paid off. None of them really finished around their ADP. Most of them lost 10, 15 spots of ADP. They were drafted as the RB20 because they were washed up and finished as the RB35. Some of them also dealt with more injuries in addition to their poor play, which makes sense because if these guys are older, if they have a lot of touches under their belt, they're usually going to deal with more injuries as well. So that is the breakdown of the data set. Now it's time to refine this data and apply it to the current crop of running backs. As I did last year, I'm going to remove the historical outliers from this data set and see how the touch and age apex changed, because anybody who is outlined in yellow in this data set that you guys can see on the screen right now is either in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a future Hall of Famer, or has received votes for the Hall of Fame so far. So these guys historically had very long careers. The only active running backs, in my opinion, that have a chance at the Hall of Fame would be Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. So to make this data more applicable to the current crop, I'm removing absurd outliers like Frank Gore, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Adrian Peterson, because these guys simply played at a high level well into their late 20s, well into their early 30s in some cases, well past 2,000 career touches and 30-plus years old. Hence why these guys are going to be in the Hall of Fame. They are historical outliers. Then we are left with a lot less running backs. We're left with about 35 running backs, I believe. The averages changed mightily, too. These backs fell off on average 5.7 PPR points per game, so it was about the same point per game drop-off, but the age and touches changed quite a bit. Age 27.7 years old, 1,363 career touches. The market also soured on these guys much quicker. Makes sense because these guys weren't future Hall of Famers. The average redraft in Dynasty ADP before their fall-off was a top 12 running back in both formats, falling to RB31 and 30 the year after their fall-off, respectively. So in simple terms, we all saw these guys decline. We saw them fall off, and it was a great bet to trust that instinct and avoid those landmines in dynasty drafts, in redraft leagues. Human beings have an innate need for certainty, and knowing that these guys have already finished as high-end dynasty or fantasy running backs makes people want to rebuy into them, even though it's actually a safer bet to bet on the young guys who haven't done it yet than it is to bet on these older guys who have fallen off and who are over the hill. And finally, the last alteration that I wanted to make to this data was to test my instinct that old school early 2000s running backs like Jamal Lewis and Clinton Portis and some of these guys were more durable. They were bigger, they could handle more touches, and they could play longer. And that ended up being very true. You guys can see the data set of removing the old school backs, so only 2010 plus running backs and guys that are not future Hall of Famers. The instinct was correct, and below you guys can see what I think is the best representation of the question that I posed at the beginning of this video. When do multi-time RB1s fall off? The answer says that if you're not going to be a future Hall of Famer and you're not an old school running back, about 27.2 years old, and 1,144 career touches. So that is the benchmark that we're going to use to test these current players. On average, the market soured on these guys way quicker as well, mainly due to the fact that I think fantasy players over the years have gotten smarter. ADP is sharper than it's ever been. This is basically how it worked. We would draft these guys as top 12 running backs. They would fall off a cliff. And before, we would buy back into them a little bit more. But as the years have gone on, as the ADP has gotten sharper, those guys moved on average down to RB 29 in ADP, right in the midst of the RB dead zone, round 7, round 8 kind of redraft pick. And their average finish the following season, were they a bounce back candidate? Absolutely not. Their average finish was RB 36. So they were not returning on ADP as well. And same goes for Dynasty leagues, where they lost 17 spots of Dynasty ADP during that fall off season. This data is by no means meant to say that any running back that's over these thresholds is going to be terrible, but it is putting you onto the advantage that is the law of averages, law of trusting history, and those who do not trust history are bound to repeat it. The data suggests that it is a poor bet to make on older running backs with a lot of touches. Remember, there's going to be outliers, but it's a 15% chance that these guys actually hit after their fall off. And everybody in this data set was once an elite fantasy running back. So I'm not talking about, Joe Schmo, rando running backs. These guys were all multi-time RB1s at some point in their career, and only 15% of them ever regained that form after they fell off. So with that being said, let's rip apart the older running backs in the NFL. There's a ton of them approaching this due to the strength of the 2016, 2017, and 2018 running back classes that are now, in their 6th years or whatever. These players are coming to the end. And last year, if you guys were following along, a lot of the guys that I talked about ended up falling off. Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, who had already previously fallen off, Alvin Kamara, and Joe Mixon to varying extents. So on the screen right now, you guys can see the touch leaders among current fantasy relevant running backs and how old they are, how many career carries they have under their belt. As you guys might have noticed, I included some of these guys in the data set because they actually have fallen off according to the process that I outlined. Let's go through these guys rapid fire, the guys that fell off last year. Joe Mixon played in an elite offense and still averaged only 3.9 yards per carry. Couldn't force a missed tackle to save his life. So I really don't care that he finished RB7 in points per game. It was on the back of a 5-touchdown game he had against Jacksonville, and his team is rumored to be trying to cut him or trying to trade him away. In my opinion, he has already fallen off according to this data. So I would not be in on Joe Mixon in Dynasty or in redraft. Leonard Fournette fell off a cliff production-wise from 2021, and his efficiency was horrid as well, 3.5 yards per carry, and his team is cutting him. So that should speak volumes about Leonard Fournette, where he's at this point in his career. Alvin Kamara also posted, elite efficiency numbers the first 4 seasons of his career. And then in 2021, he rushed for 3.7 yards per carry. Last year, he rushed for 4.0 yards per carry with just 6 rushing touchdowns in 2 seasons. In my opinion, he is washed up. He will never be an RB1 again. And the team drafted Kendre Miller as kind of proof to that in round 3. And they signed Jamal Williams in addition to all the legal situations that Kamara is dealing with. He is by no means a guy that I want in Dynasty or in redraft. And then finally, Dalvin Cook posted the lowest yards per carry of his career and is about to be cut by the team that drafted him and extended him. So if that's not an indication that literally all of these teams don't want their running backs anymore, the market has decided that these guys are not the same players. If you look at their redraft ADP right now, all of them have lost at least 11 spots of ADP. Mixon, Cook, Fournette, Kamara, these guys are all going way lower than they were going last year. And remember, when the market decides that they are no longer the same player, it hits at an 85% rate. The only guys were pretty much, Hall of Fame caliber players. And I don't think any of these guys have a chance at the Hall of Fame. Kamara and Cook, maybe, but they would have to have another number of years of very productive play, and I just don't see that happening with the fall off we've already seen. So in my opinion, do not draft any of these guys. The 4 that I just outlined, I don't care what the projections say. It's a bad bet. Sell them for future picks, sell them for younger running backs, or use them in trades to tier up at wide receiver, to tier up at quarterback in package deals. They are bad bets to make. I know people are going to do it. People are going to see the projection with Joe Mixon in the Bengals offense and buy back in. I'm telling you, it is a mistake. They're more likely to get injured. They're more likely to suffer from more poor play. They are over the hill. As far as Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, and Nick Chubb are concerned, these guys are a little bit different because they clearly are risky investments as well to hold in Dynasty or to draft and redraft. If you think you're getting, 2 more years out of these guys, you're probably getting 1 more year out of them, if we're being honest. But all 4 of these guys still finished as top 6 running backs in points per game last year. And all 4 of these guys didn't really show any signs of decline either, despite being well over the age and touch Apex in Derrick Henry's case, and over the touch Apex for Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb. Christian McCaffrey is the youngest of these guys, but he still meets the mark on pretty much everything there. This is the difficult part of this video because I think it's pretty easy to say that we don't want the previous 4 running backs that I talked about. The difficult part is, do you sell Christian McCaffrey? Do you sell Derrick Henry? Do you sell Nick Chubb? Or do you sell Austin Eckler with the anticipation of this fall off coming? Because it is very likely that a couple of these guys fall off this coming season. And if any of these guys are potential future Hall of Famers, like I said, it's probably Christian McCaffrey or Derrick Henry, and they can be outliers. But I tend to believe that if the value is there to move any of them, Christian McCaffrey, Chubb, Eckler, or Derrick Henry, these guys should be sells for you in Dynasty right now. But if you play in league markets where running backs are devalued or you can't move off of them, or you're looking to win now this year and you think they can be, awesome holds or whatever, I would still be shopping them for younger players, but I don't mind holding these guys for 1 year. Just beware that they definitely could fall off a cliff and lose a ton of value this time next year. Aaron Jones, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs also seem kind of risky as well, especially given the age and touches that these guys are at. But the price point is stomachable for all of those guys. So I'm not inclined to sell them unless I get an elite return. So with all of these guys, it's all about price point. Their current market values that you can offload them at mitigate the risk of the age and touches at that position where deteriorating play and injuries will become more common. It is a known fact. Running back is not an old man's game. It is a young man's game. We want these guys ideally on their rookie contracts, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4 of their careers, which is why we always talk about aligning your winning window and dropping your running backs in last when it comes to rebuilding dynasty teams. This video is not to say that all of these guys will be terrible next year. It's outlining the very real and likely scenario that their best football is behind them. They're probably not likely to repeat the stunning performances that they've put up throughout their careers, just given how they have progressed from an age perspective. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you got some value from it. Like I said, the takeaways for me are to sell, Christian McCaffrey if you can get a huge return for it. Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, if you can swap them for these younger running backs, you should do it. And you guys should be seeing on your screen right now some real trades that have happened in DLF's Trade Finder leagues. If you can re-roll Austin Eckler into Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, or Ramondre Stevenson, or a similarly ranked wide receiver, absolutely go ahead and do it. If you can re-roll Nick Chubb into a mid-first rounder next year or a young wide receiver, you should go ahead and do it. You guys probably get the point right now. All of this data will be posted on flockfantasy.com. So make sure you guys head on over there to check out some of the great stuff we've been pumping out. This data, along with the trade value charts that we put out for one quarterback and superflex leagues, dynasty, rookie rankings, best ball rankings, all that stuff is live on the site right now. Prospect databases and player cards from earlier on in the offseason. And like I said earlier in the video, I want to announce a special new promotion for the month of June and July. Maybe we'll continue it on further than this, but anybody who signs up for a new annual Mother Flocker tier package, which is our highest tier, use the promo code FSE for 30% off. You'll get all of the benefits that I just outlined. You'll get first priority for dynasty decision submissions. You'll get access to our private Discord channels to get, 100% access to myself and Danny. You'll also get a free Zoom consultation if you sign up ASAP. Like I said, all the value is there on Flock Fantasy, along with everything that we're doing. You get all of the stuff from all your other favorite Dynasty content creators as well. All you have to do is sign up on the site and get in touch with us to schedule that Zoom consultation via DM on Twitter, Discord, or you can email us, and links for all that stuff is down below in the description, as well as the link to sign up on Flock Fantasy using the promo code FSE. So if that interests you, hopefully you check that out. Also, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here, and leave any of your comments down below. We really, really appreciate it. We will probably be doing a giveaway in the next coming days for some site subscribers, some free subscriptions over there as a thank you for getting us to 20,000 subscribers. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.